The rain hammered down on Davis-Monthan Air Force Base like it had a personal grudge against the Arizona desert. Lightning split the black sky in jagged white lines, and thunder rolled across the flight line loud enough to rattle the windows of the operations building. Captain Sarah Chen stood in Colonel Raymond Harding's office, water still dripping from her flight suit onto the polished floor. She'd been flying combat air patrols for 12 hours straight, and exhaustion had settled deep into her bones. But she stood at attention, shoulders back, eyes forward. "You're grounded, Chen," the colonel said without looking up from his desk. He was a big man with silver hair cut military short and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. "Effective immediately." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Sir, may I ask why?" "You lost situational awareness during today's training exercise. You put your wingman at risk. That's unacceptable for an A-10 pilot." He finally looked up at her, his eyes cold. "You're done flying combat missions until further notice." Sarah felt the words like a punch to the gut, but she didn't let it show on her face. She'd been flying the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog as pilots called it, for 6 years. She knew every inch of that aircraft. She knew the sound of its massive GAU-8 cannon, the feel of it in her hands during a gun run, the way it handled in bad weather. And she'd never, not once, put her wingman at risk. "Sir, with respect, that's not what happened today. I maintained proper spacing throughout the entire exercise. My flight data will confirm." "Are you questioning my judgment, Captain?" The colonel's voice dropped to a dangerous level. Sarah knew better than to push further. "Not here, not now." "No, sir." "Good, you're dismissed. Report to Major Bennett in Supply. He needs help with inventory." Supply, they were putting a combat pilot on inventory duty. It was the military equivalent of being sent to the corner with a dunce cap. "Yes, sir," Sarah said. She saluted, turned sharply on her heel, and walked out of the office with her head high. But once she was outside in the hallway, alone, she let herself lean against the wall for just a moment. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from anger and frustration she couldn't let anyone see. She'd known this was coming. It had been building for months, ever since Colonel Harding transferred to Davis-Monthan. He'd made it clear from day one that he didn't think women belonged in the cockpit of an attack aircraft. Oh, he never said it directly. He was too smart for that. But there were 1,000 little ways he showed it. The way he assigned her the worst mission times. The way he questioned every decision she made. The way he looked through her during briefings like she was invisible. And now this, a false accusation that could end her career. Sarah pushed off the wall and walked through the operations building, past offices where other pilots were getting ready for the next day's missions. Some of them nodded at her. A few looked away. Word traveled fast on a military base. By tomorrow morning, everyone would know she'd been grounded. Outside, the storm was getting worse. Lightning flashed so bright it turned night into day for a split second, and the thunder that followed made the ground shake. Sarah pulled her jacket tight and ran across the parking lot to her truck, an old Ford Ranger she'd bought when she first arrived at the base 3 years ago. It was dented and scratched, but it ran, and right now that was all that mattered. She drove through the base gates and out onto the highway that led to the small town of Sierra Vista, about 15 miles south. The windshield wipers could barely keep up with the rain. She had to slow down to 40 miles an hour just to see the road. Sarah lived in a small apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a living room, a bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom, but it was hers. No roommates, no noise, no one asking questions. She could be alone with her thoughts, which right now was exactly what she needed. She parked in her usual spot and ran through the rain to her front door. Inside, she peeled off her wet jacket and dropped it on the floor. Her flight suit was damp and uncomfortable. She changed into sweatpants and an old Air Force t-shirt, then stood in her kitchen staring at the refrigerator without really seeing it. Her phone buzzed. A text message from Captain Jake Morrison, her wingman. "Heard what happened. That's bull and everyone knows it. Call me if you need anything." Sarah smiled a little despite herself. Jake was a good pilot and a better friend. They'd flown together dozens of times, and he knew the truth about what happened during today's exercise. But his testimony wouldn't matter, not against a colonel. She didn't reply to the text. Instead, she made herself a cup of coffee and sat down at her small kitchen table. Through the window, she could see lightning still dancing across the sky. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Sarah had grown up in San Francisco, the daughter of immigrants who'd come to America with nothing but determination and hope. Her father had worked 2 jobs to put her through college. Her mother had cleaned houses until her hands were raw. They'd sacrificed everything so Sarah could have opportunities they never had. And one of those opportunities was the Air Force. Sarah had joined right after college, driven by a desire to serve her country and prove that she belonged in places where people like her weren't always welcome. She'd excelled in flight training. She'd been at the top of her class in weapons school. She'd earned her place in the cockpit of the A-10, one of the toughest, most respected aircraft in the military. But none of that seemed to matter to Colonel Harding. To him, she was just a woman who shouldn't be there. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from her father. "Wei," she answered in Mandarin. "Sarah, are you okay?" Her father's voice was concerned. He always seemed to know when something was wrong. "You sound tired." "I'm fine, Ba, just a long day. Your mother and I worry about you, flying those planes in bad weather." "The weather's fine," Sarah lied. "How are things at the restaurant?" Her parents had opened a small Chinese restaurant in the Sunset District 5 years ago. It was their dream, something they'd worked toward their entire lives, and it was struggling. Sarah sent the money when she could, but it never seemed to be enough. "We're managing," her father said, which meant things were tight. "But don't worry about us. You focus on your flying, make us proud." "I will, Ba." They talked for a few more minutes about family, about her younger brother who was studying engineering at Berkeley, about the weather in San Francisco. Normal things, safe things. Sarah didn't mention being grounded. She didn't want them to worry. After she hung up, she sat in the darkness of her apartment and listened to the rain. The storm outside matched the storm she felt inside. Anger at the injustice, frustration at the system that allowed it, and underneath it all, a deep fear that everything she'd worked for was about to slip away. But Sarah Chen didn't give up. That wasn't who she was. She opened her laptop and started going through her flight data from today's training exercise. Every A-10 recorded detailed information during flight: altitude, speed, position, weapons status, everything. If she could prove that she'd maintained proper spacing and hadn't endangered her wingman, maybe she could fight this. The data was complex, full of numbers and coordinates that would mean nothing to most people. But Sarah had been reading flight data for years. She knew what to look for, and as she scrolled through the information, her suspicion grew stronger. She hadn't made a mistake. The spacing had been perfect. The timing had been right. Everything about her flying had been textbook. So why had Colonel Harding accused her of losing situational awareness? Sarah sat back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. There were only 2 possibilities. Either the colonel had misread the data, or he was deliberately lying. And given everything that had happened over the past few months, she knew which one was more likely. He was setting her up. The realization hit her like ice water. This wasn't about one bad flight or one mistake. This was about getting rid of her. Colonel Harding wanted her out of his squadron, and he was going to use whatever excuse he could find to make it happen. Sarah felt her hands curl into fists. She wanted to scream. She wanted to storm back to the base and confront him. But she knew that would only make things worse. She needed to be smart about this. She needed proof. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Jake. "Meeting at O'Malley's tomorrow night. Half the squadron will be there. You should come." O'Malley's was a bar just outside the base where pilots went to unwind. Sarah had been there plenty of times, though she usually only stayed for one drink before heading home. She wasn't much for the heavy drinking and loud talk that came with pilot culture. But maybe tomorrow she'd go. Maybe she'd listen to what people were saying. Maybe someone else had noticed what Colonel Harding was doing. She texted back, "I'll be there." The storm continued through the night. Sarah lay in bed listening to the thunder, unable to sleep. Her mind kept going over everything that had happened, looking for clues she might have missed, trying to figure out what to do next. At some point, exhaustion finally won and she drifted off. But her sleep was restless, filled with dreams of flying through storms, of aircraft spinning out of control, of falling from the sky with no way to pull up. She woke early before dawn. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange quiet. Sarah got up and made coffee, then stood at her window watching the sun rise over the mountains in the distance. The desert looked clean and fresh after the rain, like the storm had washed away all the dust and dirt. If only it could wash away her problems as easily. At 8 o'clock, she drove back to the base and reported to supply, as ordered. Major Bennett was a career logistics officer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked more like an accountant than a military officer. He seemed surprised to see her. "Captain Chen, what are you doing here?" "Colonel Harding assigned me to help with inventory, sir." Major Bennett frowned. "That's unusual. We don't normally have pilots doing inventory work." "I'm just following orders, sir." He studied her for a moment, and she could see the understanding dawn in his eyes. He knew what was happening, but like everyone else on the base, he wasn't going to get involved. It wasn't his problem. "Well, okay then," he said. "Follow me." He led her to a warehouse full of supplies, everything from office equipment to aircraft parts. Her job, he explained, was to go through every item, verify the quantities, and update the computer system. It was mind-numbing work that would take days, maybe weeks. Pilot work? No, busy work meant to humiliate her. Sarah started in one corner of the warehouse and began counting. Boxes of printer paper, cases of bottled water, stacks of cleaning supplies, on and on, hour after hour. Her back ached. Her eyes hurt from reading small labels, but she kept going because that's what soldiers did. They followed orders even when those orders were designed to break them. During lunch, she sat alone in the base cafeteria. Other pilots came and went, some nodding at her, others pretending they didn't see her. Jake sat down across from her with his tray. "This is wrong," he said without preamble. "What Harding's doing to you is wrong, and everyone knows it." "But nobody's going to say anything," Sarah replied quietly. "What do you want them to do? He's a colonel. He can make life hell for anyone who crosses him." "I know." Sarah pushed her food around on her plate. She wasn't hungry. "I'm not asking anyone to risk their career for me." "You shouldn't have to ask. This is supposed to be a team. We're supposed to have each other's backs." Jake leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Look, I've been asking around. You're not the only one Harding's had problems with. There was a pilot at his last base, a woman named Lieutenant Harris. She filed a complaint against him for gender discrimination. 2 weeks later, she was transferred to Alaska." Sarah looked up sharply. "He got her shipped to Alaska." Officially, it was just a routine reassignment, but the timing was suspicious. And there's been others. He has a pattern. "Then why is he still in command?" Jake shrugged helplessly. "Because he's good at covering his tracks, because he has friends in high places, because the system protects people like him." He paused. "But maybe this time is different. Maybe this time we can prove what he's doing." "How?" "Come to O'Malley's tonight. There's some people who want to talk to you." Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon counting inventory and thinking about what Jake had said. If Colonel Harding had a pattern of discrimination, if there were other victims, maybe she could build a case against him. It wouldn't be easy. It might not even work. But it was better than doing nothing. At 6 o'clock, she clocked out and drove to O'Malley's. The bar was exactly what you'd expect. Dim lighting, old pictures on the walls, the smell of beer and fried food. It was already crowded with pilots and ground crew, people unwinding after a long day. Jake was at a table in the back corner with 2 other pilots Sarah knew, Captain Lisa Rodriguez and Captain Mark Thompson. Both had been at Davis Monthan longer than Sarah. She slid into the booth next to Lisa. "Jake said you wanted to talk." Lisa nodded. She was a helicopter pilot, tough and no-nonsense, with short dark hair and sharp eyes that didn't miss much. "We've been watching what Harding's doing to you, and we want to help." "Why?" Sarah asked bluntly. "You barely know me." "Because it's not right," Mark said. He was older than the rest of them, probably close to 40, with gray at his temples. "And because if we let him get away with it, he'll keep doing it to others." "Jake told me about Lieutenant Harris." "Harris is just one," Lisa said. "I did some digging. In the last 10 years, Harding has commanded 3 different squadrons. At each one, female pilots either left the service or requested transfers within a year of his arrival. That's not a coincidence." Sarah felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. "Can we prove it?" "Maybe, if we can find the pilots he pushed out and get them to talk. If we can document the pattern. If we can show that he's creating a hostile work environment." "That's a lot of ifs." "I know," Lisa admitted, "but it's better than sitting back and letting him win." They talked for over an hour, making plans, discussing strategies. By the time Sarah left the bar, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she had a chance. She drove home through the dark desert night, past cacti that stood like silent sentinels in the moonlight. The stars were brilliant overhead, no longer hidden by storm clouds. Everything seemed clearer now, more focused. Sarah had a purpose again. She was going to fight back. But as she pulled into her apartment parking lot, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. There was a white sedan parked across the street, a man sitting inside. Even in the darkness, she could tell he was watching her building. She sat in her truck for a moment, considering her options. Then she got out and walked to her apartment, keeping her movements casual, not looking directly at the sedan. But every nerve in her body was alert. Inside, she locked the door and immediately went to her window, peeking out through the blinds. The sedan was still there. Colonel Harding was having her watched. Sarah stepped back from the window, her heart pounding. This was bigger than she'd thought. Harding wasn't just trying to ground her. He was trying to intimidate her, to scare her into backing down. But Sarah Chen didn't scare easily. She pulled out her phone and took a picture of the sedan, zooming in to get the license plate. Then she texted the photo to Jake with a simple message. "Being watched, document everything." His reply came back within seconds. "On it." Sarah went to bed that night knowing she was in a fight for her career, maybe even for her freedom. But she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. She had allies. She had people who believed in her. And somewhere out there in the night, an A-10 Thunderbolt II sat on the flight line, waiting for its pilot to return. The storm had passed, but another one was coming. The next morning, Sarah woke to find the white sedan gone. But she knew that didn't mean much. If Colonel Harding wanted her watched, he'd make sure it happened in ways she wouldn't always notice. She got ready for another day of inventory work, putting on her uniform with the same precision she always had. Her father had taught her that how you presented yourself mattered. "Stand tall," he used to say. "Let them see your pride." At the base, she checked in with Major Bennett and returned to the warehouse. But this time, she had a plan. While counting supplies, she was also thinking through everything Lisa and Jake had told her. If they could find other pilots who'd been pushed out by Colonel Harding, if they could document his pattern of behavior, they might have enough to file a formal complaint with the Inspector General. It was a long shot. Military justice moved slowly, and officers like Harding knew how to protect themselves. But it was something. Around mid-morning, her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Found Harris. She's willing to talk. Can you meet tonight?" Sarah's pulse quickened. Lieutenant Harris, the pilot who'd been shipped to Alaska. If she was willing to go on record about what Harding had done to her, that would be huge. She texted back, "Where and when?" "My place, 1900 hours." Sarah spent the rest of the day in the warehouse, her mind only half on the inventory. The other half was preparing for the evening meeting, thinking about what questions to ask, what information they'd need to build their case. At lunch, she saw Colonel Harding in the cafeteria. He was sitting with some other senior officers, laughing at something one of them had said. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man who had nothing to worry about. Sarah kept her distance and ate quickly, then returned to the warehouse. She didn't want to give Harding any excuse to find fault with her. But as she was walking back across the base, she heard someone call her name. She turned to see Captain Morrison, Jake, jogging to catch up with her. "Hey," he said, slightly out of breath. "You got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" Jake looked around to make sure no one was in earshot. "I talked to some of the other pilots this morning, guys who have flown with you. They're willing to write statements supporting you, saying they've never seen you make the kind of mistakes Harding's accusing you of." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. They'd really do that? Of course they would. You're a good pilot, Sarah. Everyone knows it, and everyone's sick of watching Harding play his games. But won't that put them at risk if Harding finds out? "Let us worry about that," Jake interrupted. "We've got your back, that's what matters." Sarah didn't trust herself to speak for a moment. She'd spent so much time feeling alone in this fight that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have people stand with her. "Thank you," she finally managed. Jake grinned. "Thank me when we nail this guy." The afternoon dragged by. Sarah went through the motions of counting inventory, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about her parents, about how proud they'd been when she earned her wings. She thought about all the years of training, all the sacrifices she'd made to get here. She couldn't let Harding take it all away. Finally, 1700 hours arrived. Sarah clocked out and headed to her truck. As she drove through the base gates, she checked her mirrors constantly, looking for any sign of surveillance. She didn't see the white sedan, but that didn't mean she wasn't being followed. Lisa Rodriguez lived in a small house about 20 minutes from the base, in a quiet neighborhood with neat lawns and American flags hanging from front porches. Sarah parked on the street and walked up to the front door. Before she could knock, Lisa opened it. "Come in," she said, ushering Sarah inside quickly. The living room was small but comfortable, with worn furniture and pictures of helicopters on the walls. Jake was already there, sitting on the couch with a laptop open in front of him, and sitting in an armchair across from him was a woman Sarah didn't recognize. She was probably in her early 30s, with red hair pulled back in a ponytail and tired eyes. She stood when Sarah entered. "Captain Chen, I'm Emily Harris." She held out her hand. Sarah shook it. "Thank you for coming and for being willing to talk." Emily gave a bitter smile. "I should have talked 2 years ago. Maybe if I had, you wouldn't be going through this now." They all sat down and Lisa pulled out a small recorder. "Do you mind if we record this? We need documentation." "Go ahead," Emily said. Lisa hit record and set the device on the coffee table. "Okay, Emily, tell us what happened." Emily took a deep breath. "I was stationed at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho. Colonel Harding took command of our squadron in the spring of 2023. At first, everything seemed fine. He was professional by the book, but after a few weeks I started noticing things." "What kind of things?" Sarah asked. "Little comments, nothing overtly sexist, just microaggressions, I guess you'd call them. Questions about whether I was sure I could handle certain missions. Suggestions that maybe I'd be better suited for transport work instead of combat. And he always did it in front of other pilots, like he was trying to undermine my confidence." Sarah nodded. She knew exactly what Emily meant. She'd experienced the same thing. "Then the real problem started," Emily continued. "He began finding fault with everything I did. My flight reports weren't detailed enough. My aircraft inspections were incomplete. My mission planning was subpar. None of it was true, but he documented everything. He was building a case against me." "Did you file a complaint?" Jake asked. "I tried. I went to the Inspector General's office and reported what was happening. I told them I believed I was being discriminated against based on gender." Emily's voice cracked slightly. "They investigated for about 2 weeks, talked to a few people, looked at some records. Then they concluded that there was no evidence of discrimination. They said Colonel Harding was just holding me to high standards." "That's bull," Lisa muttered. "I know, but what could I do? I'd filed a formal complaint and been told I was wrong. Meanwhile, Harding kept making my life miserable. He gave me the worst flight schedules. He assigned me to training missions instead of real operations. He made it clear that I wasn't welcome in his squadron." Emily paused and wiped at her eyes. "Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I requested a transfer. 2 weeks later, I was on my way to A-10 Air Force Base in Alaska. I spent a year there, flying in conditions that were 10 times harder than anything in Idaho. Then I put in my papers and left the service. I'm a civilian now. I work for a shipping company in Seattle." The room was quiet for a moment. Sarah felt anger burning in her chest, not at Emily, but at the system that had failed her. At Colonel Harding for driving a good pilot out of the service. At everyone who'd stood by and let it happen. "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly. "Don't be sorry, be angry." Emily leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Harding is still out there, still doing the same thing to other women. If you have a chance to stop him, you have to take it. Don't make the mistake I made. Don't let him win." "We won't," Jake said firmly. "But we need your help. Would you be willing to submit a formal statement? Would you testify if it came to that?" Emily hesitated. Sarah could see the fear in her eyes. Speaking out against a colonel was risky, even for someone who wasn't in the military anymore. "I have a job now," Emily said slowly. "A life. If I get involved in this, it could get messy. There could be retaliation." "I understand," Sarah said, "and I won't pressure you, but I need you to know that if we don't stop him, he'll keep doing this. There will be more women like us." Emily was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll write a statement and send it to you, and if you need me to testify, I'll be there." Relief flooded through Sarah. "Thank you." They talked for another hour, going over details, discussing strategy. Jake took notes on his laptop while Lisa asked questions. By the time they finished, they had a clearer picture of what they were up against and what they needed to do. As Sarah was leaving, Emily caught her arm. "Be careful," she said quietly. Harding is dangerous. He's not just a sexist bully. He's smart and he's connected. He knows how to make problems disappear. I'll be careful, Sarah promised. She drove home slowly, taking a route through town that would make it harder for anyone to follow her. She didn't see any surveillance, but she stayed alert anyway. At her apartment, she made dinner, just rice and vegetables, simple food that reminded her of home, and sat down to eat while going through her notes from the meeting. They had Emily's testimony now, which was good, but they needed more. One person's complaint could be dismissed as a grudge or a misunderstanding, but multiple complaints, a clear pattern of behavior, that would be harder to ignore. Lisa had said she'd try to track down other pilots who'd served under Harding. If they could find even 2 or 3 more willing to talk, they'd have a real case. Sarah was washing her dishes when her phone rang. It was an unknown number with a local area code. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Captain Chen? The voice was male, unfamiliar. My name is David Foster. I'm a reporter with the Arizona Daily Star. I'm working on a story about gender discrimination in the military, and your name came up. I was hoping we could talk. Sarah's blood went cold. How did you get my name? I have sources at A-10. They told me you were recently grounded under questionable circumstances. I have no comment, Sarah said quickly. Don't call this number again. She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking. A reporter. This was the last thing she needed. If word got out that she was fighting with her commanding officer, it could destroy any chance she had of winning. The Air Force didn't like its dirty laundry aired in public. They'd probably just transfer her to some remote base and hope the problem went away. She texted Jake immediately. Reporter called asking about me. David Foster from Arizona Daily Star. What do we do? His response came quickly. Don't talk to him, don't talk to any reporters, this needs to stay internal. Sarah paced her apartment, too agitated to sit still. How had a reporter gotten wind of this? Had someone talked? Or was this just coincidence, a journalist digging into military discrimination and stumbling onto her situation? Either way, it was bad, really bad. She tried to calm herself down, tried to think logically. But all she could think about was her career circling the drain. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd sacrificed, slipping away because she'd dared to stand up to the wrong person. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Jake. Lisa found 2 more pilots, both willing to talk. We're building the case. That helped. At least something was going right. Sarah forced herself to breathe slowly, to focus on what she could control. She couldn't stop reporters from asking questions, but she could keep building her case against Harding. She could gather evidence. She could be ready when the time came to fight. She spent the rest of the evening going through her flight records again, documenting every mission she'd flown under Harding's command. She noted the times he'd questioned her decisions, the missions he'd assigned her, the evaluations he'd written. It all painted a clear picture of someone looking for excuses to criticize her. Around midnight, exhausted, she finally went to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. She kept thinking about Emily Harris, about the year she'd spent in Alaska before finally giving up and leaving the service. She kept thinking about the other pilots Lisa had found, women who'd been pushed out or driven away. And she kept thinking about Colonel Harding, sitting in his office, protected by his rank and his connections, free to keep doing the same thing over and over. Not this time, Sarah thought. This time, someone's going to stop you. The next few days fell into a pattern. Sarah reported to the warehouse each morning and counted inventory. She ate lunch alone or with Jake and Lisa. She kept her head down and did her job. And in the evenings, she worked on building the case against Harding. Lisa had managed to track down 2 more former pilots, Captain Jennifer Wu and Lieutenant Rebecca Martinez. Both had served under Harding at different bases. Both had similar stories to Emily's, and both were willing to provide statements. Jake collected supporting testimony from current pilots who'd flown with Sarah. The statements were consistent. Captain Chen was a skilled, professional pilot who'd never shown any sign of the poor judgment Harding accused her of. Slowly, piece by piece, they were building something solid. But Sarah knew they were running out of time. Every day she spent in that warehouse was another day Harding could use to further damage her reputation. She needed to act soon. On Friday afternoon, she made a decision. She went to see the base's Inspector General, Colonel Patricia Reeves, a tall woman with steel gray hair and a reputation for fairness. Sarah stood in Colonel Reeves's office, her heart pounding, and said the words she'd been preparing for days. "Ma'am, I'm here to file a formal complaint against Colonel Raymond Harding for gender discrimination and creating a hostile work environment." Colonel Reeves looked at her for a long moment, then she picked up a pen. "Sit down, Captain, tell me everything." Sarah talked for over an hour. She laid out the pattern of behavior, the false accusations, the way Harding had systematically undermined her. She provided the statements from Emily Harris and the other former pilots. She showed the supporting testimony from current squadron members. When she finished, Colonel Reeves sat back in her chair. "This is serious, Captain. You understand that filing a formal complaint against a superior officer can have consequences for your career." "Yes, ma'am, I understand." "And you're prepared to see this through, wherever it leads." Sarah thought about her parents, about their sacrifices. She thought about all the women who'd been driven out of the service before her. She thought about the sitting on the flight line, waiting. "Yes, ma'am, I'm prepared." Colonel Reeves nodded slowly. "All right, I'll open an investigation. In the meantime, you'll continue with your current assignment. Don't discuss this complaint with anyone except your attorney if you choose to get one. And Captain." "Yes, ma'am." "Watch your back. This kind of thing, it can get ugly." Sarah left the office feeling both relieved and terrified. She'd done it. She'd officially filed the complaint. There was no going back now. She drove home that evening in a daze, barely noticing the desert landscape around her. When she got to her apartment, she found Jake and Lisa waiting in the parking lot. "We heard," Jake said simply. "You filed the complaint." "Word travels fast." "It does on a military base," Lisa agreed. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I feel like I just jumped out of an airplane without checking if I had a parachute." "You have a parachute," Jake assured her. "You have the truth and you have us." They went up to Sarah's apartment and ordered pizza. It was a small act of normalcy in the middle of chaos, and Sarah was grateful for it. They didn't talk about the complaint or about Harding. They talked about movies and music and places they wanted to travel. They were just three friends hanging out on a Friday night. But as Jake and Lisa were leaving, Lisa turned serious. "You know Harding's going to fight back, right? He's not going to just accept this." "I know. So be ready, keep documenting everything, stay alert, and don't give him any ammunition to use against you." Sarah nodded. She understood. The real battle was just beginning. That night she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She thought about everything that had led to this moment, all the early mornings and late nights, all the training and studying, all the hours in the cockpit learning to fly the A-10. She'd given everything to the Air Force. And now she was fighting to stay in it. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Another storm was rolling in across the desert. Sarah got up and went to the window, watching lightning flicker on the horizon. She thought about the first time she'd flown through a thunderstorm. It had been during basic flight training, and her instructor had been nervous about letting her go up. But Sarah had insisted. She'd taken off into angry skis, flown through turbulence that shook the aircraft like a toy, navigated around lightning strikes and heavy rain. And she'd landed safely, her hands steady on the controls. Flying through storms was what pilots did. It was part of the job. This storm, the one brewing around her now, was no different. It was just another challenge to navigate, another obstacle to overcome. Sarah Chen had flown through literal lightning. She could handle Colonel Raymond Harding. The rain started falling, gentle at first, then harder. Sarah stood at the window and watched it come down, washing the world clean. Tomorrow, she thought, tomorrow the real fight begins. But tonight she was ready. The investigation moved slowly, like everything else in the military bureaucracy. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah continued her tedious work in the supply warehouse while Colonel Reeves's office interviewed witnesses and reviewed records. Sarah tried to stay patient, but it was hard. Every morning she woke up and put on her flight suit, a uniform she'd earned the right to wear, only to spend her day counting boxes of printer paper and cleaning supplies. The other pilots were flying missions, training, staying sharp. She was withering away in storage. But she kept her head up. She reported to Major Bennett every morning with a professional attitude. She did her work without complaint. And in the evenings, she stayed in touch with Jake and Lisa, monitoring the progress of the investigation. 3 weeks after she'd filed the complaint, things started to get worse. It began with small things. Her truck had a flat tire one morning. No big deal except when she went to change it, she found that all 4 of her lug nuts had been loosened. Not enough to fall off while driving, but enough to be dangerous. Then her mail started going missing. Important letters from the Air Force Personnel Center, documents she needed for the investigation. They just disappeared before reaching her mailbox. And there were the phone calls, always late at night, always from blocked numbers. When she answered, there was just silence on the other end, sometimes breathing. She started letting them go to voicemail. Sarah knew what was happening. Harding was trying to intimidate her, trying to make her too scared to continue with the complaint. It was a textbook intimidation campaign, nothing she could prove, but enough to keep her on edge. She documented everything. She took pictures of the loosened lug nuts. She filed reports about the missing mail. She kept a log of the mysterious phone calls. If Harding wanted to play games, she'd make sure there was a record. One evening, as she was leaving the base, she noticed a car following her. Not the white sedan from before. This was a dark blue Ford. It stayed 3 or 4 cars back, but it made every turn she made, followed her all the way to her apartment. Sarah pulled into her parking lot and sat in her truck, watching in her mirrors. The Ford drove past slowly, and she caught a glimpse of the driver. It was a man she recognized from the base, Sergeant Rick Coleman, one of the crew chiefs who worked on the flight line. He was friendly with Colonel Harding. She pulled out her phone and took a picture of the Ford's license plate as it disappeared around the corner. That night, she sent the picture to Colonel Reeves along with a detailed account of the surveillance. The next morning, her phone rang. It was Reeves's office, asking her to come in immediately. Sarah drove to the base with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Had they found something? Was the investigation over? Colonel Reeves's office was on the 2nd floor of the headquarters building. When Sarah arrived, she found not just Reeves, but also a lawyer from the Judge Advocate General's office, Captain Marcus Webb, a serious-looking man in his 40s. "Sit down, Captain Chen," Reeves said. Her expression was grave. "We have a problem." Sarah's heart sank. "What kind of problem, ma'am?" "Colonel Harding has filed a counter-complaint against you," Captain Webb explained. "He's alleging that you've been spreading false accusations about him in an attempt to damage his reputation and career. He's also claiming that your performance has been substandard and that you've been insubordinate on multiple occasions." Sarah felt like she'd been punched. "That's not true. None of that is true." "I know," Reeves said. "We know, but it complicates things. Now we're investigating 2 complaints simultaneously, and we have to take both seriously." "So what does this mean?" Sarah asked. "It means the process is going to take longer," Webb said. "And it means you need to be even more careful. Harding is playing hardball now. He's trying to discredit you before we can complete our investigation." "He's also trying to scare you off," Reeves added. "The surveillance, the phone calls, the tampering with your vehicle, that's all part of his strategy. He wants you to drop the complaint." "I'm not going to drop it," Sarah said firmly. "Good," Reeves replied. "But I want you to take precautions, vary your route home, stay with friends when you can, and document everything, every incident, every contact, every threat." "I will, ma'am." As Sarah was leaving, Captain Webb caught up with her in the hallway. "Off the record," he said quietly, "you're doing the right thing, but you need to understand what you're up against. Harding has been in the Air Force for 25 years. He has friends at the Pentagon. He knows how to work the system." "Are you saying I can't win?" "I'm saying it won't be easy, and you need to be prepared for this to get a lot worse before it gets better." Sarah drove back to the warehouse in a fog. A counter-complaint. Harding was actually accusing her of making false statements. It was so absurd it would be funny if it wasn't potentially career-ending. That evening, she met with Jake and Lisa at Lisa's house. They'd invited Mark Thompson as well, the older pilot who'd been part of their initial planning sessions. "This is insane," Jake said when Sarah told them about the counter-complaint. "He's just making stuff up." "Of course he is," Mark said calmly. "It's standard operating procedure for someone like Harding. When you're accused of misconduct, you accuse your accuser right back. It muddies the waters, makes it harder to determine who's telling the truth." "So what do we do?" Lisa asked. "We keep gathering evidence," Mark replied. "Sarah, you said Colonel Reeves has other pilots willing to testify about Harding's behavior, right? 3 former pilots, plus several current ones who'll vouch for my flying." That's good, but we need more than testimony. We need documentation, records of his decisions, patterns we can prove with data. How do we get that? Sarah asked. Mark smiled grimly. Leave that to me. I've been in the Air Force long enough to know where the bodies are buried, and I know people who can help. Over the next week, Mark proved as good as his word. Through his contacts and his years of experience, he managed to obtain copies of personnel records from Harding's previous commands. Not anything classified or illegal, just publicly available information that showed transfer rates, complaint records, and performance reviews. The data was damning. At every base Harding had commanded, there was a significant increase in the number of female pilots requesting transfers or leaving the service. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. Sarah compiled all of this into a comprehensive report and submitted it to Colonel Reeves's office. She didn't hear back immediately, but she knew the investigation was ongoing. Meanwhile, her life became a strange kind of prison. She worked in the warehouse by day, always aware that Harding's people might be watching. She varied her route home every evening, checking her mirrors constantly. She stayed with Lisa twice when she noticed cars following her. She screened all her calls and saved every threatening message. It was exhausting and stressful, and there were moments when Sarah wondered if it was worth it. Moments when she thought about just dropping the complaint and requesting a transfer, starting over somewhere else. But then she'd think about Emily Harris, working for a shipping company in Seattle, her Air Force career over. She'd think about Jennifer Wu and Rebecca Martinez, good pilots driven out of the service by a man who couldn't accept that women belonged in the cockpit. And she'd remember why she was fighting. 6 weeks after filing her complaint, Sarah got a call from Captain Webb. Can you come to Colonel Reeves's office tomorrow morning at 800? We have some updates on the investigation. Sarah barely slept that night. She kept running through possibilities in her head. Had they found enough evidence? Would they take action against Harding, or would they dismiss her complaint and end her career? At 800 the next morning, she stood in Colonel Reeves's office. Also present were Captain Webb, and to Sarah's surprise, a brigadier general she didn't recognize. Captain Chen, Reeves began, this is Brigadier General Sandra Morrison from Air Force Personnel Command. She's been reviewing your case. General Morrison was a small woman with sharp eyes and an air of absolute authority. She gestured for Sarah to sit. Captain, I've read your complaint and all the supporting documentation. I've also read Colonel Harding's counter-complaint. She paused. I want you to know that we take allegations of discrimination very seriously, but we also take allegations of false reporting seriously. Sarah's stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought. They're going to side with him. But then General Morrison continued. After a thorough investigation, we've found no evidence to support Colonel Harding's allegations against you. However, we have found substantial evidence supporting your allegations against him. Sarah couldn't breathe. Had she heard that right? We've identified a pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning multiple commands, Morrison went on. We've interviewed former pilots who worked under Colonel Harding, and their testimony is consistent with yours. We've reviewed personnel records and found statistically significant anomalies in transfer and retention rates for female pilots in his squadrons. What does this mean, ma'am? Sarah managed to ask. It means Colonel Harding is being relieved of his command effective immediately. He'll be reassigned to a staff position pending further disciplinary action. It also means you're reinstated to flight status, effective immediately. The words didn't quite register at first. Sarah just stared at General Morrison, trying to process what she'd heard. You're reinstating me. Captain Chen, you're a decorated pilot with an exemplary service record. You never should have been grounded in the first place. I'm sorry it took this long to set things right. Sarah felt tears threatening and fought them back. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me. Thank the people who stood with you, and thank yourself for having the courage to speak up. General Morrison stood, and everyone else stood with her. Welcome back to flight status, Captain. The 355th Fighter Squadron needs good pilots. After the meeting, Sarah walked out of the headquarters building in a daze. It was over. She'd won. Harding was gone, and she was back. She pulled out her phone and called Jake. He answered on the first ring. I'm back, she said simply. I'm flying again. Jake whooped so loud she had to pull the phone away from her ear. That's amazing. We need to celebrate. I'm telling everyone. Sarah smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Yeah," she said, "let's celebrate." That evening, O'Malley's bar was packed with pilots from Sarah's squadron. Word had spread fast about Harding's removal and Sarah's reinstatement. People kept coming up to congratulate her, to shake her hand, to buy her drinks. Lisa gave her a huge hug. "You did it. I can't believe you actually did it." "We did it," Sarah corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone." Mark Thompson raised his beer glass in a toast. "To Captain Chen, one of the finest pilots I know and one of the bravest people I've ever met." Everyone cheered. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the support, by the genuine happiness these people felt for her. She'd been so focused on the fight that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have a victory. But as the celebration went on, Sarah found herself stepping outside for some air. The parking lot was quiet, the night air cool. She looked up at the sky, at the stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds. She thought about her parents, about how proud they'd be when she told them. She thought about Emily Harris and the other pilots who hadn't been able to fight back. She thought about the waiting for her on the flight line, ready to fly. Tomorrow she'd be back in the cockpit. Tomorrow she'd be doing what she was meant to do. But tonight, just for a moment, she let herself feel the weight of what she'd accomplished. She'd stood up to power, she'd fought for what was right, and she'd won. Jake came out to check on her. "You okay?" "Yeah," Sarah said. "I'm good, just taking it all in." "You earned this, Sarah. Don't ever doubt that." They stood together in comfortable silence, looking at the stars. "So what happens to Harding?" Sarah asked after a while. "I heard he's being transferred to a desk job at the Pentagon. No more command, no more contact with combat pilots. He'll finish out his career shuffling papers until he retires." "Good," Sarah said, and she meant it. They went back inside, back to the celebration. Sarah allowed herself one beer, then switched to water. Old habits died hard. She never drank much the night before flying. Because tomorrow she'd be back in the air. Tomorrow she'd be Captain Sarah Chen again, not just a pilot fighting for survival, but a pilot doing her job. The celebration lasted until late. When Sarah finally left O'Malley's, it was past midnight. She drove home carefully, checking her mirrors out of habit, but there was no surveillance now. No white sedans or dark blue Fords following her. That chapter was over. At her apartment, she collapsed into bed, exhausted but happy. For the first time in months, she slept deeply and peacefully, without nightmares about falling aircraft or angry colonels. When her alarm went off at 500, Sarah woke with a sense of purpose. She showered, put on her flight suit, and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked the same as always, same face, same uniform, same determination in her eyes. But something had changed. She'd been tested in ways she never expected, and she'd come through it. She was stronger now, more confident, more sure of herself. Sarah Chen was ready to fly. The morning air was cool and fresh as Sarah drove onto Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. She felt like she was seeing everything for the first time. The guard at the gate who waved her through with a smile, the maintenance crews already at work on the flight line, the rows of A-10 Thunderbolts sitting like patient war horses waiting for their riders. She parked in her usual spot and walked to the squadron building. Several pilots were already there, preparing for the day's missions. When Sarah walked in, they stopped what they were doing and broke into applause. "Welcome back, Chen," someone called out. "About time," another voice added. Sarah felt her cheeks warm, but she smiled and nodded her thanks. It felt good to be back where she belonged. The new squadron commander was Lieutenant Colonel James Bartlett, a stocky man with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. He'd transferred in from Nellis Air Force Base 2 days ago, brought in specifically to replace Harding and restore trust in the squadron. He called Sarah into his office first thing. "Captain Chen, it's good to have you back on flight status. I've reviewed your file, your entire file, not just the garbage that Harding put in there, and I'm impressed. You're one of the best pilots in this squadron." "Thank you, sir. I want you to know that what happened to you shouldn't have happened, and I'm going to make damn sure nothing like it happens again under my command. My door is always open. If you have concerns, you bring them to me. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Good, now let's get you back in the air where you belong. You're scheduled for a training flight this afternoon. Captain Morrison will be your wingman. I want you to take it easy, shake off the rust, get reacquainted with the aircraft." Tomorrow, you'll rejoin the regular mission rotation. Sarah left the office feeling like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. A training flight. After nearly 2 months grounded, she'd finally be flying again. The morning passed in a blur of briefings and preparations. Sarah went through the pre-flight checklist with the same meticulous attention to detail she'd always had. She reviewed weather reports, checked her flight plan, coordinated with air traffic control. Every step was familiar, comfortable, like putting on an old pair of boots that fit perfectly. At 1300 hours, she walked out to the flight line. The A-10 assigned to her was tail number 780684, one she'd flown many times before. The crew chief, a young sergeant named Davis, was waiting by the aircraft. "Good to see you back, Captain," he said, handing her the maintenance log. "She's in perfect condition, I made sure of it." Sarah looked at the aircraft. The A-10 wasn't pretty, with its bulbous nose, high-mounted engines, and straight wings. It looked more like a flying bathtub than a sleek fighter jet. But it was beautiful to Sarah. This was the aircraft that could take incredible punishment and keep flying. This was the aircraft that saved lives on the ground. This was her aircraft. She did her walk-around inspection, checking every panel, every surface, every control. Then she climbed up the ladder and settled into the cockpit. The seat felt like coming home. Jake's voice came over the radio. "Hog 2 ready for taxi." Sarah keyed her mic. "Hog 1 ready, let's fly." They taxied to the runway in formation. Sarah went through her final checks, instruments good, controls responsive, engines at proper temperature. Everything was perfect. Tower cleared them for takeoff. Sarah pushed the throttles forward and felt the A-10 surge down the runway. The familiar rumble of the engines, the acceleration pushing her back in her seat, the moment when the wheels left the ground and she was airborne, it all felt like being reborn. "Hog 1 airborne," she reported. "Hog 2 airborne," Jake confirmed. They climbed into the clear Arizona sky, the desert spreading out below them like a brown and tan quilt. Sarah banked left and headed toward their training area, feeling the aircraft respond to her every input. It had been 2 months, but her skills hadn't faded. Flying was in her blood. They spent the next hour running through basic maneuvers, formation flying, tactical turns, simulated attack runs. Sarah's confidence grew with each passing minute. She was rusty in a few areas, but nothing that wouldn't come back with practice. "Looking good, Hog 1, Jake called over the radio. "Like you never left." Sarah smiled inside her oxygen mask. "Feels good to be back, Hog 2. They returned to base and landed smoothly. As Sarah taxied back to the parking area, she saw a small crowd had gathered, other pilots and ground crew who'd come out to watch her first flight back. When she shut down the engines and climbed out of the cockpit, they applauded. She felt self-conscious about all the attention, but she understood what it meant. Her victory wasn't just personal. It was a victory for everyone who'd ever been treated unfairly, everyone who'd been told they didn't belong. Her fight had meant something. That evening, Sarah went home to her apartment and called her parents. She'd been putting it off, not wanting to worry them while everything was uncertain. But now she could tell them the whole story. Her mother answered on the second ring. "Sarah, we were just talking about you." "Hi, Ma, is Ba there? I want to tell you both something." Her father picked up the extension. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, better than fine, actually. But something happened and I want you to hear it from me." She told them everything, about Colonel Harding, about being grounded, about filing the complaint and the investigation that followed. She told them about the intimidation and the counter-complaint, and she told them about the victory, about being reinstated and flying again. When she finished, there was silence on the line. Then her mother spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "We are so proud of you." "Your mother is right," her father added. "You stood up for yourself, you fought for what was right, that takes courage." "I was scared, Ba. The whole time I was terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," her father said. "Courage is doing what's right even when you're afraid. You showed real courage, daughter. You honor our family." Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks. She hadn't cried during the whole ordeal, hadn't let herself break down. But hearing her parents' pride and support finally broke through her defenses. "Thank you," she whispered. They talked for another hour about the restaurant and her brother and family gossip. Normal things, safe things. When Sarah finally hung up, she felt cleansed somehow, like telling her parents had made everything real and final. The next day, Sarah rejoined the regular mission rotation. She flew combat air patrol over a training range, providing close air support for Army units on the ground. It was routine work, but she loved every minute of it. This was what she'd trained for. This was why she'd fought so hard to stay. Over the following weeks, Sarah settled back into the rhythm of squadron life. She flew missions, participated in training exercises, mentored younger pilots. Lieutenant Colonel Bartlett proved to be an excellent commander, fair, competent, supportive. The squadron's morale improved dramatically. But Sarah noticed something interesting. Other female pilots, not just at Davis-Monthan but at other bases, started reaching out to her. They'd heard about her case against Harding. They wanted advice, support, sometimes just to talk to someone who understood what they were going through. Sarah realized she'd become something she never intended to be, a symbol. Her fight had inspired others to speak up about their own experiences with discrimination and harassment. One evening, she got a call from Captain Emily Harris, the pilot who'd been driven to Alaska and eventually out of the service. "Sarah, I just wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For finishing what I started, for having the courage I didn't have." Emily paused. "I've been thinking a lot since you filed your complaint, about whether I gave up too easily, about whether I should have fought harder." "You did what you needed to do at the time," Sarah said gently. "There's no shame in that." "Maybe, but I want you to know that what you did, it matters. I heard through the grapevine that 2 other female pilots at Mountain Home have come forward with complaints about their treatment. They probably wouldn't have done that if you hadn't shown them it was possible to win." After they hung up, Sarah sat thinking about what Emily had said. She hadn't just fought for herself. She'd fought for all the women who'd come before her and all the ones who'd come after. That responsibility felt heavy, but it also felt right. 3 months after returning to flight status, Sarah was in the squadron ready room when Lieutenant Colonel Bartlett asked her to step into his office. "I have news," he said. "Good news, I think. You've been selected for the Air Force Weapons School." Sarah's heart skipped. Weapons School. It was the Air Force's equivalent of Top Gun, an intensive training program for the best pilots. Graduates became weapons and tactics instructors, the experts other pilots looked to for guidance. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes. You've earned this, Chen. Your flying skills are outstanding, and your leadership during this whole situation with Harding showed the kind of character we need in our weapons officers." "Yes," Sarah said. "Absolutely yes." Weapons school started in 2 months at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. It would be intense, 6 months of the most challenging flying of her career. But it was also an honor and an opportunity. That evening, Sarah celebrated with Jake and Lisa at O'Malley's. They toasted her selection and talked about the future. "You're going to kick ass at weapons school," Lisa said confidently. "They're lucky to have you. Just don't forget about us regular pilots when you become a hotshot instructor," Jake joked. Sarah laughed, never. But as she drove home that night, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From being grounded and humiliated to being selected for weapons school. From fighting just to keep her career to being recognized as one of the best pilots in her field. She thought about Colonel Harding, now sitting behind a desk at the Pentagon, his career effectively over. She didn't take pleasure in his downfall, that wasn't who she was. But she was glad he couldn't hurt anyone else. And she thought about all the women who'd reached out to her, who'd found courage in her story. That mattered more than any award or recognition. Sarah pulled into her apartment parking lot and sat in her truck for a moment, looking up at the stars. The same stars she'd looked at on that night when everything seemed lost. The same stars that had witnessed her struggle and her triumph. Tomorrow she'd fly again, and the day after that, and the day after that, because she was a pilot and this was what pilots did. But tonight she allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She'd fought the battle and won. She'd stood up to injustice and made a difference. Captain Sarah Chen was exactly where she belonged. The weeks leading up to weapons school passed quickly. Sarah flew as many missions as she could, determined to be in peak form when she arrived at Nellis. She studied tactics and weapons employment. She worked out every day, knowing the physical demands of the school would be intense. She also continued to mentor other pilots, particularly the women in the squadron. Lieutenant Jennifer Cole, a young pilot fresh out of flight training, sought her out one day. "Captain Chen, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you?" I mean, when things were bad with Colonel Harding, how did you keep going? How did you not just give up? Sarah thought about it. I remembered why I joined the Air Force in the first place. I loved flying. I loved serving my country, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me, no matter how powerful they were. Jennifer nodded slowly. I want to be like you someday. Sarah smiled. Be like yourself. Be the best pilot you can be, and don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong in that cockpit. Finally, the day came to leave for Nellie's. Sarah packed her truck with everything she'd need for 6 months: uniforms, flight gear, books, personal items. She said goodbye to her apartment, to Jake and Lisa, to the squadron that had become her family. Lieutenant Colonel Bartlett shook her hand. Good luck at weapons school, Captain. Make us proud. I will, sir. The drive to Nellie's took about 6 hours through the desert. Sarah arrived in the evening and checked into the temporary housing on base. The next morning, she reported for the first day of school. There were 20 pilots in her class, drawn from A-10 squadrons across the Air Force. Only 3 were women, including Sarah. The instructors were legendary pilots, weapons officers with thousands of hours of combat experience. The course was everything Sarah had hoped for and more. They flew complex missions every day, learning advanced tactics for close air support, air interdiction, and combat search and rescue. They studied threat systems and enemy tactics. They learned how to be teachers, how to pass their knowledge on to the next generation of pilots. It was brutal. Sarah got less sleep than she had in years. The flying was at the edge of her abilities, pushing her to be better every single day. The academics were intense. The pressure was constant. But she loved every minute of it. Halfway through the course, Sarah was scheduled for a particularly challenging mission. A simulated close air support scenario with friendly forces in contact with the enemy, multiple threats in the area, and bad weather complicating everything. She briefed her flight meticulously, planning for every contingency. Then they launched into a gray sky, heavy clouds obscuring the desert below. The mission went wrong almost immediately. The ground commander's radio was intermittent. The enemy threats were more numerous than briefed. And then, to make matters worse, a thunderstorm rolled into the area, bringing lightning and heavy turbulence. Sarah had to make split-second decisions: where to position her aircraft, how to coordinate with her wingmen, when to attack, and when to hold off. She flew through the storm with absolute concentration, trusting her instruments, trusting her training. When they finally cleared the target area and headed back to base, her flight lead, Major Steve Chen, no relation, came over the radio. Damn fine flying, Hog 3. You just earned your patch. The patch, the weapons school graduate patch that marked you as an expert, an instructor, someone other pilots could trust with their lives. Sarah felt a surge of pride, but she kept her voice calm and professional. Thank you, sir. That evening, her instructors pulled her aside. Captain Chen, we've been watching you throughout this course. You're one of the strongest pilots we've seen in years. Your flying is exceptional, but more than that, your decision-making under pressure is outstanding. We're recommending you for a follow-on assignment as an instructor here at Nellie's after you graduate, another instructor added. We need good people teaching the next generation, and you'd be perfect for it. Sarah was speechless. An instructor assignment at weapons school was one of the most prestigious jobs in the Air Force, and they were offering it to her. I'd be honored, sir. You've earned it, Captain, not just with your flying, but with the character you've shown. We heard about what happened with Colonel Harding. That took guts. The final weeks of weapons school flew by. Sarah completed the course at the top of her class. At the graduation ceremony, her parents flew in from San Francisco to watch her receive her patch and her certificate. Her father, who rarely showed emotion, had tears in his eyes. My daughter, the weapons officer, he said, his voice breaking. We are so proud. After graduation, Sarah had 2 weeks of leave before starting her instructor assignment. She went home to San Francisco and spent time with her family, visiting the restaurant, catching up with friends, sleeping in her childhood bed. One afternoon, she went for a walk through Golden Gate Park with her mother. They didn't talk much, just enjoyed being together. At one point, her mother stopped and looked at her. You've changed, she said in Mandarin. You're stronger now, more settled in yourself. I had to fight for what I believed in, Ma. It changed me. Good changes, her mother said, taking her hand. You know who you are now. That's worth more than any medal or award. Sarah thought about that as they walked. Her mother was right. The fight with Harding had tested her in ways she never expected, but it had also revealed her true character, shown her what she was capable of when pushed to her limits. She was Captain Sarah Chen, Air Force weapons officer, instructor, pilot, fighter, and she was proud of who she'd become. When her leave ended, Sarah returned to Nellie's and began her new job as an instructor. She taught tactics and weapons employment to new classes of A-10 pilots. She shared the hard-won lessons she'd learned, and she made sure every pilot who went through her instruction knew they belonged there, regardless of gender or background. Life was good. Sarah was doing work she loved, flying the aircraft she loved, serving her country with honor. The nightmare with Colonel Harding felt like ancient history, a trial she'd overcome and moved past. But sometimes, late at night, she'd think about how close she'd come to losing everything. How one man's prejudice had nearly destroyed her career. How the system had almost failed her. And she'd remember why it was important to keep fighting, keep pushing, keep making sure the door stayed open for those who came after her. Because that's what warriors did. They protected others. They stood up to bullies. They made the world a little bit better, one fight at a time. Sarah Chen had fought her battle and won, but she knew there would be others who'd need to fight theirs. And when they did, she'd be there to support them, to show them it was possible to win. Because she'd been there, she'd stood at the edge of losing everything, and she'd found the strength to fight back. That strength would never leave her. 18 months after graduating from weapons school, Captain Sarah Chen stood in front of a classroom at Nellie's Air Force Base, teaching a group of young A-10 pilots the finer points of close air support tactics. She'd found her calling as an instructor. There was something deeply satisfying about passing on her knowledge, about watching new pilots grow and develop under her guidance. But on this particular Tuesday morning in late October, her mind wasn't entirely on the lesson. The weather forecast had been troubling, a massive storm system moving across the southwest, the kind that brought violent thunderstorms and dangerous flying conditions. Captain Chen, one of the students raised his hand. The brief mentioned possible weather delays for this afternoon's flight. How bad is it looking? Sarah pulled up the weather display on the classroom screen. Pretty bad, actually. We're looking at severe thunderstorms, heavy rain, possible hail. We'll make a final decision at 1100 hours, but be prepared for the possibility that we'll scrub today's mission and reschedule. The students groaned, but they understood. Safety always came first. After class, Sarah checked her phone and found a message from Lieutenant Colonel Bartlett, her old squadron commander at Davis-Monthan. They'd stayed in touch over the past year and a half, and he'd become something of a mentor to her. "Give me a call when you have a chance. Need your advice on something." Sarah called him back during lunch. "Sir, it's Sarah Chen. You wanted to talk." "Sarah, good to hear your voice. Listen, I'm reaching out because we have a situation developing, and I think you might be able to help." "What kind of situation?" "There's a young female pilot in my squadron, Captain Maria Gonzalez. Sharp pilot, good skills, but she's having problems with her flight commander. I'm seeing some of the same patterns we saw with you and Harding. Nothing overt, nothing I can prove yet, but the signs are there." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "What do you need from me?" "Would you be willing to talk to her? Maybe share your experience, let her know she's not alone. I think it would help to hear from someone who's been through it." "Of course, give her my number and have her call me." "Thanks, Sarah. I knew I could count on you." After they hung up, Sarah sat in her office thinking. She'd hoped that her fight with Harding would be the last time she'd have to deal with this kind of situation. But she knew better. One victory didn't change an entire culture. There would be other Hardings, other women who'd need support and guidance. That afternoon, as the storm system moved closer, Sarah was in the operations building when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Captain Chen." "Captain Chen, this is Maria Gonzalez from Davis-Monthan. Colonel Bartlett said I should call you." The voice was young, uncertain. I'm having some problems, and he thought you might understand." "I do understand. Tell me what's going on." For the next 20 minutes, Maria poured out her story. Her flight commander, Major Richard Stone, had been undermining her from the moment she joined the squadron. He questioned every decision she made. He gave her the worst mission assignments. He'd written her up for minor infractions while ignoring the same behavior in male pilots. It was Harding all over again, just with different names. "What should I do?" Maria asked, her voice breaking. I've tried to just do my job to prove myself, but nothing's good enough for him. Sarah chose her words carefully. First, you need to know that you're not crazy and you're not imagining things. What you're describing is real and it's not okay. Second, you need to start documenting everything. Every interaction, every unfair decision, every criticism. Keep detailed records. Will that be enough? I don't know, Sarah admitted. But it's a start. And Maria, don't face this alone. Find allies in your squadron. Talk to Colonel Bartlett. He clearly has your back. And if you need to talk, call me anytime, day or night. Thank you, Maria whispered. I've been feeling so isolated. It helps to know someone else has been through this. After they hung up, Sarah looked out her office window at the darkening sky. The storm was almost here. Lightning flickered in the distance, and thunder rumbled like approaching artillery. Her desk phone rang. It was the operations officer. Captain Chen, we're scrubbing all flights for the rest of the day. This storm's going to be a monster. Make sure your students are secured, and then you can head home. Yes, sir. Sarah gathered her things and was walking to the parking lot when her personal cell phone rang again. This time it was a number she recognized. Jake Morrison, still flying A-10s at Davis Monthan. Jake, what's up? Sarah, we have a situation. His voice was tense, urgent. There's been an incident. A training mission went wrong, and we have a pilot down in the mountains north of the base. Search and rescue is being delayed because of the storm. Sarah's blood went cold. Who is it? Maria Gonzalez. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The young pilot she just talked to, the one who'd reached out for help, she was down somewhere in the mountains with a major storm bearing down on her position. What happened? Her flight was doing close air support training near the Catalina Mountains. She developed engine problems and had to eject. We got a beacon signal, but it's weak. Search and rescue can't launch helicopters in this weather. The earliest they can go is probably dawn tomorrow, and by then. He didn't need to finish the sentence. By dawn, Maria could be dead from exposure, especially if she was injured. The desert mountains got cold at night, and the storm would make it worse. Jake, I'm at Nellie's. I'm 300 miles away. I know, I thought you should know. She asked about you during the pre-flight brief this morning, said she'd talked to you and it helped. Sarah stood in the parking lot as rain started to fall, heavy drops that hit like bullets. Her mind was racing. A pilot down, search and rescue grounded, someone who'd asked for her help, who'd trusted her. She made a decision. Jake, I need you to do something for me. Get me the exact coordinates of Maria's last known position. Also, I need weather updates every 30 minutes. Can you do that? Sarah, what are you thinking? I'm thinking someone needs to go get her, and it might as well be me. Are you insane? You can't fly in this weather. Nellie's has grounded all flights. I'm a weapons school instructor, Jake. I'm qualified to make my own risk assessments. Sarah was already running toward the operations building. Get me those coordinates. She burst into the ops center, where the duty officer was monitoring the weather. Sir, I need to speak with Colonel Davidson immediately. Colonel Davidson was the wing commander at Nellie's, a no-nonsense pilot with 30 years of experience. He listened as Sarah explained the situation. A pilot down, search and rescue grounded, the approaching storm. Captain, I understand your concern, but we've grounded all flights for good reason. This storm is dangerous. Sir, I'm not asking to run a training mission. I'm asking to attempt a rescue. That pilot down there reached out to me for help today. I can't just sit here and do nothing. Davidson studied her for a long moment. You understand that if you go, you'll be flying solo through some of the worst weather we've seen in years. No wingman, no support. Yes, sir. And you understand that if something goes wrong, we won't be able to come get you either. I understand, sir. Davidson pulled out his phone and made a call. Sarah couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but after a few minutes, he hung up and looked at her. General Morrison, you remember her from your case against Harding. She's now the commander of Air Combat Command. I just explained the situation to her. She's authorizing a rescue attempt, but only if you're willing to volunteer. This is your choice, Captain. Sarah didn't hesitate. I'll go. Then let's get you airborne before I change my mind. The next hour was a blur of preparation. Sarah filed a flight plan, got weather updates, studied the terrain around Maria's last known position. The coordinates Jake had sent her showed she was down in a rugged area about 40 miles north of Davis-Monthan in the Catalina Mountains. The maintenance crew prepped an A-10 for flight, tail number 80242, a newer model with upgraded avionics. The crew chief, Master Sergeant Williams, checked every system personally. "She's ready, Captain, but I gotta tell you, I think you're crazy for going up in this weather." Sarah pulled on her flight gear. "Maybe, but that pilot down there is counting on someone to come for her." As she walked out to the aircraft, the storm was intensifying. Rain poured down, and lightning split the sky every few seconds. The wind was gusting hard enough to make walking difficult. Sarah climbed into the cockpit and strapped in. She went through her pre-flight checks with extra care. In weather like this, there was no room for error. Every system had to be perfect. Colonel Davidson's voice came over the radio. "Hog 1, this is Nellie's tower. You're cleared to taxi when ready. Sarah, good luck. Bring that pilot home." "Roger, Tower. Hog 1 taxiing." Sarah guided the A-10 toward the runway, the aircraft buffeting in the wind. She'd flown in bad weather before, but this was different. This was volunteering to fly into the heart of a major storm system, alone, to reach someone who needed help. As she lined up on the runway, Sarah thought about Maria Gonzalez, probably cold and scared and injured, waiting for rescue that might never come. She thought about her father's words from years ago. "Courage is doing what's right even when you're afraid." She was definitely afraid, but she was going anyway. "Hog 1, you're cleared for takeoff. Winds are gusting to 40 knots. Use caution." Sarah pushed the throttles forward. The accelerated down the runway, fighting the crosswind. At rotation speed, she pulled back on the stick and the aircraft clawed its way into the turbulent sky. The moment she entered the clouds, everything went gray. Rain hammered against the canopy. Turbulence threw the aircraft around like a toy. Lightning flashed so close Sarah could smell ozone. But she kept climbing, kept pushing forward, trusting her instruments, trusting her training. "Hog 1 is airborne and heading southeast," she reported. "ETA to search area 40 minutes. As she flew through the storm, Sarah focused on the mission. She had the coordinates. She had survival gear in case she needed to land and reach Maria on foot. She had flares and emergency supplies. She had the skills to fly in bad weather. What she didn't have was much time. If Maria was injured, if she was exposed to the elements, every minute counted. The flight to the search area was the longest 40 minutes of Sarah's life. She navigated by instruments, unable to see anything through the storm. Lightning struck close enough to make her instruments flicker. Hail drummed against the aircraft. The turbulence was so violent that she had trouble reading her displays. But the A-10 lived up to its reputation as one of the toughest aircraft ever built. It absorbed the punishment and kept flying. Finally, Sarah reached the search area. She descended through the clouds, breaking out at about 5,000 feet above the rugged mountain terrain. Visibility was terrible, maybe a mile in the rain and darkness. She activated her radio. "Maria Gonzalez, this is Captain Sarah Chen. Do you copy?" "Static." "Maria, if you can hear me, this is Sarah Chen. I'm overhead your position. Can you activate your emergency beacon?" Still nothing. Sarah flew a search pattern, looking for any sign of the downed pilot, a parachute wreckage, the flash of an emergency strobe. But the terrain was difficult, covered in pine trees and broken by rocky outcroppings. In this weather at this altitude, finding one person was like finding a needle in a haystack. Lightning flashed, and for just a second, Sarah saw something, a glint of white in the trees, maybe a parachute. She marked the coordinates and circled back. Another flash of lightning. Yes, there it was. A parachute caught in the trees, about 2 miles from the coordinates of Maria's last transmission. "Maria, I've got a visual on what I think is your position. If you can hear me, use your radio or your emergency flare." A moment later, a red flare shot up through the trees. Sarah felt a surge of relief. Maria was alive and conscious. But now came the hard part. She couldn't land the A-10 in this terrain. The nearest suitable landing area was probably 20 miles away, and even if she could land, they'd both be stranded in the storm with no way to get out. No, she needed to guide search and rescue to this exact position. But with helicopters grounded and no other aircraft willing to fly in this weather, that could take hours. Maybe not until morning. Maria might not have hours. Sarah keyed her radio. Davis Month Ops, this is Hog 1. I've located the downed pilot. She's alive, but her position is precarious. What's the status on search and rescue? The response was discouraging. Hog 1, ground rescue teams are being assembled, but weather is delaying their departure. Earliest ETA to your position is 4 hours, possibly longer. 4 hours, in this storm in the cold, possibly injured. 4 hours could be fatal. Sarah made another decision. Roger, Davis Monthan. Hog 1 is going to maintain position overhead and provide guidance for rescue teams. I'll keep the pilot company until help arrives. It was risky, flying circles in a thunderstorm at night in mountain terrain. But Sarah wasn't going to leave Maria alone down there. For the next 3 hours, Sarah flew a pattern over Maria's position, checking in with her every few minutes on the emergency frequency, keeping her talking, keeping her conscious. The storm raged around them, but inside the cockpit, Sarah stayed focused, stayed calm. She told Maria stories about flight school, about her own experiences, about the fight with Colonel Harding. She told her about her family, about growing up in San Francisco. Anything to keep Maria engaged, to keep her from slipping into shock or hypothermia. And Maria talked back, her voice weak but determined. She talked about why she joined the Air Force, about her dreams of being a great pilot, about her family in Texas who were so proud of her. Sarah, Maria said at one point, her voice shaking, I was going to quit. Major Stone. He was breaking me down. I was going to request a transfer, maybe even leave the Air Force. Don't make that decision now, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the turbulence buffeting her aircraft. Wait until you're safe. Wait until you've had time to think clearly. But you understand, right? You know what it's like. I do, and I also know that you're stronger than you think. You survived an ejection. You survived being alone in the mountains during a storm. That takes real strength, Maria. That's who you are. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah saw lights below. The ground rescue team, making their way through the difficult terrain toward Maria's position. Maria, I've got eyes on the rescue team. They're about a quarter mile from your position. You're going to be okay. 20 minutes later, the rescue team reached Maria. They reported that she had a broken arm and was suffering from exposure, but she was alive and would make a full recovery. Hog 1, this is rescue team leader. We've got her. Good work, Captain. You saved her life tonight. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but her voice stayed steady. Roger, rescue. Happy to help. Hog 1 is RTB. She turned the battered A-10 toward Nellie's. The storm was finally starting to break up, and by the time she reached the base, the weather had improved enough for a safe landing. When she taxied in, the entire maintenance crew was waiting, along with Colonel Davidson and most of the instructors from the weapons school. As Sarah shut down the engines and climbed out of the cockpit, they broke into applause. Master Sergeant Williams looked at the aircraft, which had taken a beating from the storm. Minor hail damage, stress marks, systems that would need careful inspection. Captain, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen a pilot do, he said. Then he grinned. It's also the bravest. Colonel Davidson shook her hand. Hell of a job, Captain Chen, hell of a job. Sarah was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained. But she felt something else too, a deep sense of satisfaction. She'd gone into that storm alone, flown through conditions that grounded everyone else, and brought a fellow pilot home safely. That night, after the debriefing and the paperwork, Sarah collapsed into bed in her quarters. Her phone was full of messages. From Jake, from Lisa, from Lieutenant Colonel Bartlett, from her parents, from people she barely knew who'd heard about the rescue. But the one that mattered most was from Maria Gonzalez, sent from the hospital. Thank you for coming for me. Thank you for not giving up. You saved my life tonight and you saved my career too. I'm not quitting. I'm going to fight just like you did. Sarah smiled and closed her eyes. She'd come a long way from that night when Colonel Harding had grounded her, when everything seemed hopeless. She'd fought for her career, won her battle, and now she'd saved someone else's life. Tomorrow there would be more challenges. There would be other pilots who needed help, other battles to fight. But tonight, Sarah Chen could rest knowing she'd made a difference. She'd flown through lightning, literally and figuratively, and she'd made it to the other side. And somewhere out there in the darkness, an A-10 Thunderbolt II sat on the flight line, its battle scars a testament to the courage of the pilot who'd flown it through the storm. The Warthog had done its job. It had brought its pilot home safely, and it had helped save a life. just like it was designed to do. Part 6. The rescue of Maria Gonzalez made national news. By the time Sarah woke up the next morning, her phone was flooded with messages from reporters requesting interviews. The Air Force Public Affairs Office called, asking if she'd be willing to speak to the press about the rescue. Sarah declined. This wasn't about publicity or recognition. It was about doing what was right, about being there for a fellow pilot who needed help. But the Air Force had other ideas. 3 days after the rescue, Sarah was called to a meeting with General Sandra Morrison, the same general who'd overseen the investigation into Colonel Harding nearly 2 years earlier. "Captain Chen, sit down," Morrison said when Sarah entered her office at Nellie's. The general looked the same as Sarah remembered, small but commanding, with sharp eyes that didn't miss anything. "Ma'am, I want to talk to you about what you did last Tuesday night, flying into that storm alone to reach Captain Gonzalez." Morrison leaned back in her chair. "That was either the bravest thing I've seen in 30 years of military service or the most foolish. I haven't decided which." Sarah kept her expression neutral. "Ma'am, a pilot was down and needed help. I had the skills and the aircraft to reach her. It seemed like the right choice at the time." "The right choice," Morrison repeated. "Do you have any idea how many regulations you bent, how many safety protocols you pushed to their limits?" "Yes, ma'am, I do." Morrison was quiet for a moment, studying Sarah. Then she smiled. "Good, because I'm putting you in for the Distinguished Flying Cross. What you did was extraordinary. You saved a life under conditions that would have stopped most pilots." Sarah felt her chest tighten with emotion. The Distinguished Flying Cross, one of the military's highest awards for heroism in flight. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep being the kind of pilot and the kind of person that makes the rest of us proud to wear this uniform." Morrison stood and walked around her desk. "Sarah, I've been following your career since you filed that complaint against Harding. You've shown incredible courage, not just in the cockpit, but in standing up for what's right. The Air Force needs more people like you." "Thank you, ma'am. I also want to talk to you about your future. How do you feel about command?" Sarah blinked, surprised by the change in topic. "Ma'am, you're coming up on the point in your career where you'll need to make some decisions. Stay in the cockpit as a senior pilot or move into leadership positions. I think you'd make an excellent squadron commander someday, but that's a choice you'll need to make." Sarah hadn't thought much about command. She loved flying, loved teaching. The idea of giving that up to push papers and manage personnel had never appealed to her. But then she thought about Lieutenant Colonel Bartlett, who'd stood up for her when she needed it. She thought about what a difference a good commander could make, how they could protect their pilots and create an environment where everyone had a fair shot. "I think I'd like that, ma'am, someday." "Good, we'll talk more about it when the time comes." Morrison walked Sarah to the door. "Oh, and Sarah, Captain Gonzalez is being transferred to a different squadron. Major Stone is under investigation. Seems your rescue brought a lot of attention to what was happening down at Davis-Monthan, and people started asking questions." Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders. "Is Maria going to be okay?" "She'll be fine. Broken arm is healing well. She's already talking about getting back in the cockpit. Says she has someone to look up to now." After leaving Morrison's office, Sarah went to the hospital to visit Maria. She found the younger pilot sitting up in bed, her arm in a cast, looking tired but determined. "Captain Chen," Maria's face lit up. "They told me you'd come by." "How are you feeling?" "Sore, embarrassed, grateful to be alive." Maria gestured to a chair. "Please sit." Sarah sat down. "You have nothing to be embarrassed about. Engine failures happen. You did everything right. You controlled the aircraft, you ejected safely, you survived in difficult conditions until help arrived." "I almost gave up," Maria admitted quietly. "When I was in those trees, cold and hurt, I thought about just letting go. But then I heard your voice on the radio, and I knew someone was coming for me. That kept me going." "You kept yourself going," Sarah corrected. "I was just there to provide encouragement." They talked for a while about the rescue, about what would happen next. Sarah told Maria about Major Stone's investigation, about the transfer to a new squadron. "Do you think I should stay in the Air Force?" Maria asked. "After everything that's happened." Sarah thought about how to answer. "That's your decision, but I'll tell you what I learned from my own experience. The military isn't perfect. There are still people like Harding and Stone who make life difficult. But there are also good people, people like Colonel Bartlett, like General Morrison, like the pilots who stood with me when I needed them. And every time someone like us stands up and fights back, we make it a little bit better for the people who come after us. So you think I should stay? I think you should ask yourself why you joined in the first place. If those reasons still matter to you, then yes, you should stay, and you should fight for your right to be here. Maria nodded slowly. I joined because I wanted to fly, I wanted to serve my country, I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. Then there's your answer. Before Sarah left, Maria caught her hand. Thank you, not just for the rescue, but for showing me it's possible to win these fights. I won't forget that. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The Distinguished Flying Cross ceremony was held at Nellie's with full military honors. Sarah's parents flew in for it, as did Jake and Lisa. When the citation was read aloud, describing her actions that night in the storm, Sarah felt tears in her eyes. Her father stood in his best suit, his chest puffed with pride. Her mother wept openly. When the general pinned the medal to Sarah's chest, the entire assembly erupted in applause. Afterward, at the reception, Sarah found herself surrounded by young pilots, men and women who wanted to shake her hand, to hear her story, to tell her she was an inspiration. One young woman, a lieutenant fresh out of flight training, approached nervously. Captain Chen, I just wanted to say thank you. For what? For showing us it's possible. I'm heading to my first squadron next month, and I was scared. Scared I wouldn't be good enough, scared I wouldn't be accepted, scared I'd face what you faced. But seeing what you've accomplished, knowing you didn't give up, it gives me hope. Sarah smiled. You're going to do great, just remember, you earned your place in that cockpit. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. As the reception wound down, Sarah found herself alone for a moment with General Morrison. The general handed her a glass of champagne. To your continued success, Captain. They clinked glasses. Sarah took a sip, then asked a question that had been nagging at her. Ma'am, what happened to Colonel Harding? I heard he was assigned to the Pentagon, but that was almost 2 years ago. Morrison's expression hardened. Harding retired 6 months ago, not voluntarily. Once your case opened the door, other complaints came forward. The investigation uncovered a pattern spanning his entire career. He was given the choice to retire quietly or face a court-martial. He chose retirement. So he got away with it, Sarah said bitterly. Not exactly. He lost his career, his reputation, his pension benefits. And more importantly, he can't hurt anyone else. Sometimes that's the best we can hope for. Morrison paused. But the real victory isn't what happened to Harding. It's what happened because you fought back. The policy changes, the increased oversight, the support systems for pilots facing discrimination, all of that came from your case. You changed things, Sarah. You made the Air Force better. Sarah thought about that. She'd been so focused on her own fight, her own survival, that she hadn't thought much about the broader impact. But Morrison was right. Her case had opened doors, started conversations, created change. Thank you, ma'am, for believing in me, for supporting me when I needed it. Thank you for having the courage to speak up, for showing everyone what real leadership looks like. As Sarah drove home that evening, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The battles were over. She'd won. And more importantly, she'd helped create a path for others to follow. But peace, Sarah soon discovered, doesn't last forever. 6 months after receiving the Distinguished Flying Cross, Sarah was teaching a class at Nellie's when she got an urgent call from Lieutenant Colonel Bartlett. Sarah, I need your help again. We have another situation. Sarah's heart sank. What's happened? There's a male pilot in my squadron, Captain David Torres. He's come forward with allegations of sexual harassment by his flight commander. The case is complicated because Torres is gay, and he's facing retaliation for reporting the harassment. Sarah listened as Bartlett explained the situation. It was familiar in its broad strokes: an abuse of power, a vulnerable pilot, a system that didn't always protect the people it should. What can I do? Sarah asked. Would you be willing to talk to him, to help him navigate the complaint process? You've been through it. You know what works and what doesn't. Sarah didn't hesitate. Of course, give him my number. Over the next several months, Sarah found herself becoming an informal advocate for pilots facing discrimination and harassment. She talked to them, advised them, helped them understand their rights and options. She connected them with the right resources, helped them build their cases, supported them through the investigation process. It wasn't a role she'd sought out, but it was one that needed to be filled. And Sarah discovered she was good at it. She understood the military system. She knew how to navigate the bureaucracy. And she had credibility when Captain Sarah Chen, distinguished Flying Cross recipient, spoke up about these issues. People listened. A year after Maria's rescue, Sarah was promoted to major. With the promotion came new responsibilities and eventually the opportunity she'd been waiting for. "Major Chen," General Morrison said during a phone call, "how would you feel about taking command of an A-10 squadron?" Sarah's pulse quickened. "Ma'am, I'd be honored." "Good, because the 354th Fighter Squadron at Davis-Monthan needs a new commander, and I can't think of anyone better for the job." Davis-Monthan, the base where everything had started, where she'd been grounded and humiliated, where she'd filed her complaint against Colonel Harding. Going back there as a squadron commander would be full circle in the most profound way. "When do I start?" Sarah asked. 3 months, enough time to wrap up your work at Nellie's and prepare for command. Congratulations, Major, go make us proud. The day Sarah took command of the 354th Fighter Squadron was bright and clear, the Arizona sky a brilliant blue. She stood in front of her new squadron, 40 pilots and 200 support personnel, and accepted the guidon that symbolized her authority. Lieutenant Colonel Bartlett, who'd been serving as the interim commander, shook her hand. "It's yours now. Take care of them." "I will, sir." In her first address to the squadron, Sarah was direct and honest. "Some of you may know my history with this base. Some of you may have heard about what happened with Colonel Harding. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen, but I'm also not going to let it define me or this squadron. What I want you to know is this. Under my command, everyone gets a fair shot. I don't care about your gender, your race, your religion, your sexual orientation. I care about whether you can fly, whether you can fight, and whether you can be trusted to have your wingman's back. If you can do those things, you belong here. And if anyone in this squadron tries to make life difficult for someone because of who they are rather than what they do, you'll answer to me. That's a promise." The squadron responded with applause. Sarah saw respect in their eyes and something else. Hope. Hope that maybe things really were changing, that maybe they could trust their new commander to do what was right. Over the following months, Sarah worked to build the kind of squadron she'd always wanted to be part of. She held regular meetings with her pilots, kept her door open, listened to concerns. She made sure performance evaluations were fair and based on actual merit. She created mentorship programs pairing experienced pilots with newer ones. And when problems arose, and they always did, she dealt with them firmly and fairly. One day, about 6 months into her command, a young pilot named Lieutenant Sarah Kim, no relation, though the shared first name amused both of them, came to her office. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you." "For what, Lieutenant?" "For creating an environment where I feel like I can just be a pilot. I don't have to prove I belong every single day. I don't have to worry about being judged differently than the male pilots. I can just do my job." Kim paused. "That might not seem like a big deal to you, but it means everything to me." After Kim left, Sarah sat at her desk thinking about that conversation. Creating an environment where pilots could just do their jobs, that was exactly what she'd been fighting for all along. Not special treatment, not lowered standards, just fairness, just the opportunity to succeed or fail based on their own merits. She'd achieved that, at least in her squadron. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it mattered. 2 years into her command, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. It was Emily Harris, the pilot who'd been driven out of the Air Force by Colonel Harding years earlier. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling." "Emily, of course not. How are you?" "I'm good, really good, actually. I've been working for a major airline for the past year, flying commercial routes. It's not the same as military flying, but it's satisfying in its own way." Emily paused. "But I wanted to tell you something. I'm coming back." "Coming back?" "To the Air Force. I'm applying for a reserve commission. They're accepting prior service pilots, and after watching what you've accomplished, after seeing the changes that have happened, I want to be part of it again. I want to fly for the Air Force again." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "Emily, that's wonderful. It's because of you. You showed me that it's possible to fight back and win. You showed me that things can change. I gave up once, but I'm not giving up anymore." They talked for over an hour about the application process, about what had changed in the Air Force, about the possibility that Emily might even end up in Sarah's squadron. After they hung up, Sarah walked out to the flight line. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. A flight of A-10s was returning from a training mission, their distinctive silhouettes unmistakable against the colorful sky. Sarah watched them land, one by one, and thought about the journey that had brought her here. From being grounded and fighting for her career to commanding a squadron. From being a victim of discrimination to being a voice for change. From feeling alone and powerless to knowing she'd helped create a better Air Force for the pilots who came after her. She thought about Colonel Harding, retired and forgotten, his career ended in disgrace. She thought about all the women he'd driven out over the years, and about how many of them might have stayed if someone had stood up to him sooner. She thought about Maria Gonzalez, who'd called her just last week to say she'd been accepted to weapons school. About David Torres, who'd won his harassment case and was now thriving as a flight commander. About Emily Harris, preparing to return to the service she loved. And she thought about Lieutenant Sarah Kim and all the other young pilots who were able to focus on flying instead of constantly proving they belonged. This was the real victory, not the medals or the promotions or the recognition. The real victory was measured in the careers that continued, the pilots who stayed, the culture that slowly but steadily improved. Major Sarah Chen walked back to her office as darkness fell over Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. She had paperwork to finish, a squadron to run, flights to plan. Tomorrow, she'd be up before dawn, leading her pilots in another training mission. They'd fly low over the desert, practicing the tactics and maneuvers that made the A-10 such an effective close air support aircraft. They'd work together as a team, trusting each other, supporting each other, being the kind of squadron that military aviators dreamed of being part of. And somewhere in the distance, lightning might flash across the sky. But Sarah Chen wasn't afraid of storms anymore. She'd flown through the lightning, literally and figuratively, and she'd come out the other side. Retry this response paused because Claude reached its max length for a message. Hit continue to nudge.